Greetings, everyone! I'm Kat List, your resident storyteller fairy. Welcome to my stage. The anniversary of Bendy and the Ink Machine Chapter 2 is upon us, and after a lot of celebrating with my fellow fans for Chapter 1's anniversary this year, I wanted to do something special. Because, believe it or not, Chapter 2 is really important to why I'm a Bendy fan in the first place. It made a really positive difference in my life, and I'd like to talk about that for a bit. It's also Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. And seeing as I am on Spectrum, and Bendy is one of my special interests, this feels like it could be a really good opportunity to talk about that too. Full disclosure, I have never done a video like this before, and I've been trying to word it just right for weeks now. It's been tough to nail down what I want this video to focus on. Am I here to talk about a neurodivergent experience in a fandom space? Am I here to talk about my nostalgia for the olden days of Bendy? You know, at one point, this was a timeline of everything that's happened to me as a Bendy fan in the last 7 years, but I felt like that was a little too much. But I think what I want to talk about today can be divided into a couple of categories. First, I want to tell you the story of how I got into Bendy. Then, I want to tell you what I got out of Chapter 2 itself, with some emphasis on Sammy because he's my guy. And lastly, I want to give you some insight into what my fandom experience has been, namely in the time between Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. I want to take some time to talk about the people, and highlight a couple of creatives that really inspired me. And of course, I'm going to geek out a lot. Your girl can be a little stream of conscious sometimes. I want this video to be about gratitude, about growth, hope, and passion. I'm really anxious about sharing my passions, for reasons that will become apparent later on, so I hope that this gives you some courage to be less afraid of loving what you love. I know it's definitely helped me to write it all out. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into it! Part 1. When Kat Met Bendy. Our story begins 7 years ago, in spring of 2017. Bendy was young, a fresh idea that was still finding its footing in the world. Its first chapter released to a massive amount of curiosity and excitement. And with an unexpected success on their hands, the devs quickly got to work at expanding it with a second chapter. Bendy was just starting to figure out what it wanted to be. And similarly, so was I. Let's paint a picture of who I was at this point in time. I was in college, and it was the middle of finals. As a graphic design major, most of my workload consisted of ambitious final projects that had me up at all hours of the night trying to hit everything on the rubric. And while it could have been worse, I was in the middle of some really bad creative burnout. It had been a rough semester. I'd been isolated from my friends, my confidence was non-existent, got stuck in a bad living situation for a bit, and I was doubting everything I knew about myself. And all throughout it, I didn't have a lot of help. Suffice it to say, I was in a really vulnerable spot. One night, I parked myself in one of the student lounges with my laptop to work on the process book for a package design class. I was trying to make an effort to reconnect with old friends, so while getting my work done, I hopped on a Discord call with some folks I knew in the Sonic Sprite animation community. We were just sort of chilling and vibing. I was muted and had some earbuds in so as not to disturb anyone. Someone had set up one of those music bots. You know, the kind that used to play YouTube videos so you could listen to songs together. It was nice to just be in the presence of others. Made me feel a little less alone. While we sat there, someone queued up a song that caught my interest, and when I asked what it was, they told me it was Can't Be Erased by JT Music, and apparently, it was a fan song for this newfangled game called Bendy and the Ink Machine. This would end up being my first exposure to nerdcore music. I'd never fathomed expressing your love of a video game by making a song about it, but people make fan art and fan fiction, so sure, why not fan songs too? Nerdcore has gone on to make up a majority of my playlist since then. I was absolutely enamored with this specific song and how chilling it was. I was curious what it was all about. But upon hearing it was tied to Bendy, well, I was a bit hesitant. See, this was not my first exposure to Bendy. I had another friend in the voice acting community, TK, that was obsessed with it when it first released. Had his icon as the logo and everything. But upon hearing it was an indie horror game, I avoided it like the plague. See, back in 2015, Five Nights at Freddy's was hot on the scene, and I'd had a really bad experience with it. Someone forced me to watch the first Markiplier episode covering the game, and there was no warning that this was a horror game, even though this person knew I was extremely sensitive to horror at the time. I couldn't handle the Tower of Terror at Disney World without crying. Like, that's how bad we're talking here. and because he used my YouTube account to watch it, I was getting recommended FNAF videos with jump scares in the thumbnails for months after that. YouTube didn't have a button to say, "Don't recommend this to me" back then, and blocking did nothing. I couldn't escape it no matter what I tried. It led me to have a really strong resentment towards the series for years. Nowadays, Mr. Fazbear and I are on better terms. I'll even go as far as to say I like some parts of the series. That said, going through that experience is a big part of why I advocate so hard for self-curating and tagging your spoilers and content online. Or at least warning people when you aren't going to tag things. I want fans to have more of a choice in what ends up on their feed and what they consume. And also, I don't want anyone to have a repeat of my experience with Dreams Come to Life, where Twitter spoiled the end of the book the day it released. Ugh. But that's a salty story for another time. But back on track. That song! I couldn't get it out of my head. I had to give it another listen. So I got out the incognito tab, went to YouTube, and looked it up. Now, I don't know when you last watched the original music video for Can't Be Erased, but in case you've forgotten, it mostly consisted of really old gameplay footage from the first 2 chapters. And at the time, I was surprised by what I saw. The art style immediately hooked me. I'd never seen a game rendered like a sketch before. Like, what a foreign concept. So many games were pushing to look more and more realistic, but not Bendy. The ink demon was barely a torso, the ink machine and its mystery, the Boris corpse, it was all so far from what I'd expected. The way this game had been pitched to me was that a former animator was getting chased by monstrous versions of his cartoons. Which is technically accurate, but no one mentioned the part about human sacrifices. And then he came on screen. Sammy Lawrence. He was the most human-looking thing in a world full of monsters, and it made him stand out. And suffice it to say, I was intrigued. What was his deal? What was his story? Why was he like this? I had to know! I decided to go seek out TK and watch his playthrough of the first 2 chapters. Some college friends had asked to go grab pizza and wings together that night, which was special, only happened on Wednesdays all the way across campus. So there I was, outside of the dining hall super early, my earbuds in as I watched this on my phone. I've learned over the years that if I want to watch a video about a horror game, I do better if I start on a smaller screen or window, so this was just right. It was a fun video, and it would prompt me to look for other playthroughs over time, so I could hear a variety of perspectives on the game. For the rest of the semester, I'd have Can't Be Erased and Build Our Machine by DA Games on loop. It was the only thing getting me through finals, and it came with the hope that I'd be able to indulge in this more once summer came. And when it came, it would be a wonderful time. Part 2. The Charm of Chapter 2. If you were to ask me which chapter of Bendy and the Ink Machine is my favorite, I'd actually be hard-pressed to pick, since there's so much I love about all of them. But Chapter 2 is home to some of my favorite things that Bendy does as a whole. I was immediately taken with the audio logs. Something I constantly praise Bendy and the Ink Machine for was its use of character-based storytelling, and Chapter 2 has some of the best examples of that with Sammy Lawrence. Throughout the chapter, the player can play little recordings from the characters to gain some insight as to what their story is. We don't know for sure if these were real recordings in-universe, or people's inner monologues made real, or heck, if it's something Joey just made up in the creation of the cycle. But regardless, they're a really fun storytelling device. And all of the voice actors are so strong. Every character had me absolutely enchanted. I've heard over the years that Bendy draws a lot of inspiration from BioShock, but I didn't realize this was one of the ways it did that until recently. I've actually never played BioShock, but my friend the Friendly Introvert was streaming it a while back, so I've finally been exposed to it. And yeah, it's kind of awesome! By giving us insight into who a character used to be, it makes us feel like we know the character better before we get to see them in monster form. Even though the time we spend with these monsters is short, it gives them more impact overall. Sammy goes from a band director that's constantly irritated with the situation to a cultist and self-proclaimed prophet for the Ink Demon, and his fall from grace is so interesting. It's one of the highlights for me. I mean, if you've ever talked to me about Bendy, you'd know my 2 favorite characters are Sammy and Twisted Alice. I can't help it, he's so intriguing! I mean, he set up a whole instrument puzzle that's rigged to a projector to get himself some privacy. That's hilarious. There's a lot of jokes we make in the fandom about how Sammy is a silly, pathetic little guy that's desperate for the ink demon to notice him. But there's also a lot of depth to his character. What we knew about him at the time wasn't much, but it hit me right in the feels. As a human, he hated people invading his space when he tried to get work done. He was irritated with Joey's poor planning, and he put so much pressure on himself to get his music done on time as well as it could be. It sounded like he didn't love working for cartoons specifically, but given just how hard it is to be an artist and make a living off of that, I imagine he probably felt some pressure to stay if JDS had any kind of stability. Not to mention, he's so grumpy and done with the world. I imagine he might be afraid that no one else will want him and his peculiarities. Like, we know people in the studio think he's weird. Norman is right there calling him on it. Meanwhile, I was over here going, bro, me too. But then there's the other side of Sammy. The part that was passionate and a little strange in his more culty-sounding dialogue. But it made for an interesting character to listen to. And of course, Aaron Landon absolutely killed it voicing him. Sir, you are too powerful, my goodness. But it's his time as the monster that really got me. As a man made of ink, he's dedicated himself to trying to appeal to the ink demon, doing what he thinks will gain its favor, only to end up destroyed for it. He has no qualms about sacrificing Henry if it means he'll finally have his freedom. Freedom from what, though? The ink? The cycle of death and rebirth? His body? There are so many ways to interpret his desire for freedom. And then when we see him again in Chapter 5, he's in rough shape. We still don't know what exactly is going through his mind, but he's off the rails, retaliating over how unfair the world has been to him, only to die again, and it's just, my entire heart! I feel so bad for him. A lot of people are really surprised that my takes on a lot of the Bendy characters are really sympathetic. But the truth is, to me, it's a really human story. Every employee at this fictional studio sounds like someone you could run into on the streets. They're people that had their vices manipulated, people that Joey hurt, and now they've become something truly monstrous. And something about that concept makes me want to reach out and comfort them, much like I would real people. In a lot of ways, Sammy was weirdly relatable. Like, I too don't like people invading my space or springing things on me, and I know that's a part of my diagnosis. Your girl needs her schedules and personal space, and if expectations are not managed, I am in stress city. I give Sammy a lot of credit for dealing with Joey's shenanigans. Your girl could not tolerate that. But like, on a slightly more serious note, he was really important to me. Something about seeing him smited by the ink demon really hit me hard. It helped me realize that I didn't want to spend my life serving my own demons. That it's not worth it to dedicate so much of yourself to someone who does not care about you or treat you well. I've been there. I've done that. And while there are some things worth enduring, you are not promised any kind of grand reward for suffering. Everyone suffers at Joey Drew Studios. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. It's one of the things that's most consistent. And it's probably why you see so much fanfiction and AU stuff for me that revolves around making things better for these poor characters. I think the thing that struck me about Bendy and the Ink Machine, as a whole, was that it felt incredibly human. The game was made by a small group of people that were new to making something as ambitious as this. Speaking as someone who's been an artist for over 14 years now, there's always more to learn in your craft. And as my motto goes, we're all still learning. Bendy and the Ink Machine is not what I would call a perfect game, or even a perfect story, but it did what it needed to do. It had an impact in ways you don't see every day, especially within this genre. It spoke to people in ways I'd never seen a game speak to someone before. Ask Bendy fans from 2017 what spoke to them about the game, and you'll get a wide variety of answers. But you'll hear a lot of them say that it's how much the story hit close to home. For a number of us, it expressed a hurt about our circumstances, and in some ways, helped us through them. It's a revenge story. There's something about having vengeful fiction that feels like a satisfying emotional release when you know you can't be vengeful yourself. For others, it changed their outlook on what a game could be. And I think, ultimately, that's why I've stuck with it. It's not just the first game that did this. A lot of the books came during the height of the pandemic, where the world felt utterly hopeless. And somehow reading them things got hopeful. Boris and the Dark Survival got an update during this time when the Butcher Gang was added in, and the note that came from completing the steps to unlock them genuinely pulled at my heartstrings. There is something about Bendy that is undeniably hopeful. These characters are in a literal cartoon hellscape, suffering every day, and yet here we are, hoping that maybe, just maybe, things will get better. If not for them, then at least for us players in our own lives. You see characters like Henry continue to go on in this ever-looping cycle, even though it doesn't get better. And you wonder, is he hopeful? Does he believe this can get better? I think he does. He doesn't give up. It's one of his defining features. It's why seeing him in Dark Revival had such an impact. We thought they finally broke the man in prison, but then he comes back from it triumphantly, fighting one last time to help Audrey set things right. Some things are still worth fighting for, and it hits me right in the heart. I think Bendy is very much a game that attracts a lot of outcasts. People searching for a place to belong. That's not all of us, but it's a lot of us. It's definitely where I stand. I often felt very othered because of my diagnosis. I was either the gifted kid or treated like I had no chance of being intelligent. When you see that Joey has a studio full of outcasts, full of weirdos and vulnerable people he can manipulate, something about it makes you feel seen. Which sounds horrible, but it's weirdly true. I tried to find an old post for this video, but given Tumblr's tagging system is a mess, I couldn't dig it up. But I distinctly recall years ago, someone made a post talking about how they headcanoned Sammy as autistic, and the wording of that post really hit me. Now, I know most of you longtime fandom folks don't need me to explain what a headcanon is, but there are a couple people in the audience that I'm sending this video to that don't know what that means, so I am going to define it really quickly. A headcanon is something that you personally believe to be true about a character. It's not canon to the actual media, it's not officially confirmed, but it's something that you believe that's a part of how you see said media. Sammy being autistic is not a headcanon I thought I'd adopt, and I'm sure the devs didn't intend for him to read as anything more than a little weird and office rocker, but when I see this man, I see that part of myself. Imagining him in that way makes for a compelling story on the side. It's about thinking about how he might have had some symptoms, and how they would affect the way he falls into hell, the way he goes about everyday life. It's about feeling like someone who gets some of your circumstances exists beyond your corner of the world. It's about feeling like less of an outcast. So many people love Sammy. So many people think he's just the bee's knees. Sometimes you wonder if maybe they'd like you too. And from a number of posts I've seen where people explore this idea, suffice it to say, I feel a little less alone. It doesn't surprise me that a lot of people on Spectrum end up in fandom spaces. We're excited. A lot of us get hyper interested in things, sometimes even hyper fixated with special interests, and we want to dig through every little scrap of it. It was true of my time with Sonic and Pokemon. It was true of my time in Kingdom Hearts, and it's absolutely been true of my time in Bendy. When talking to my parents about Bendy, my dad made a comment about how it was like a treasure hunt for me. And I think that's accurate. This series appeals because I get to dive in and try to put the puzzle together. But it's also a creative exercise in that you can interpret a lot from it, which is kind of my vibe. I like that I'm allowed to overthink it for fun, because believe it or not, that is fun for me. It means that I get to find my own meanings by approaching it from multiple angles. Never get me started on high school English class. I used to love it because we got to read, and I loved reading, but when you tell me I'm only allowed to interpret the book the teacher's way, or my grade tanks, then what's the point? I'm not here to regurgitate. I'm here to ask questions. Get curious. I stopped reading for fun until we got the Bendy books, and then I was allowed to interpret things however I wanted, and no one could tell me I was wrong anymore, because that's subjective. I love seeing all the different takes and stories that emerge, no matter how correct or incorrect they are. Part of the fun of Bendy is that you can play with it from many different perspectives. What you get out of it is largely dependent on what you bring into it, and it's something that I didn't truly appreciate about fiction until I got here. You know what's funny? If you don't mind me getting personal for a second, A lot of people didn't expect me to be an artist or creative, in some ways because of my diagnosis. There's this stereotype that autistic people are all about math and science, all about logic, and I suppose I do have an air of logic to me sometimes, but boy is it twisty. No, I thrive in creative spaces. And yeah, I do struggle with art sometimes. There are some teachers that just could not teach it in a way that clicked with me. But it really is a matter of having the right teacher for your learning style sometimes. I've learned a lot about art and what I want my art to be in my time with fandoms, and I was delighted to learn that there are a lot of people who I consider to be great artists that are also on Spectrum, both in and outside of our fandom. I didn't think I could ever be a great artist, not for years, but now it gives me hope. I'd never had the positive feedback that I do here. No one had ever told me I had good ideas or made cool things before. That did wonders for my confidence, and I've tried to pay it forward by taking more time to uplift my fellow creatives, because man, they deserve to know they're wonderful. And it's stuff like that that's just at the heart of everything that I love about Bendy. Part 3. Diving into the fandom. See, that's the thing about Bendy. It's not just the source material itself that matters to me. It's the people that are important. My time in the fandom has included a lot of really great people, from all different kinds of perspectives. Despite having been in other fandoms online for years, I felt incredibly inadequate going into this one. So many of my fandom experiences were bad. I got put down a lot, told my art wasn't good enough, and my emotional nature made me an easy target for cyberbullying. I was so afraid of being passionate around other people, because it always ended with me getting laughed at rather than with. Just once, I wanted someone to laugh with me. But then I got into Bendy, and things changed. Bendy was the first piece of media I got into after separating from a lot of people that weren't kind to me. Once I realized that I was free to like whatever I wanted, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. There wasn't anyone I had to impress anymore. I could just enjoy things. And when I fell into it hard. I wrote entire essays to myself about how much I loved it, all the theories I had, and it was good. I was free to just exist. And I felt that. I felt freedom. But I was really scared to take the leap to interact with other fans. What if I was still too weird? What if I ended up getting hurt again? But you know where we are in the present. You know it turned out okay. I will admit I still struggle to open up to people. I mean, we're talking years worth of behavior that I've been working to unlearn. It takes time. But I'm a lot better off than I used to be. And I'm so grateful to have the friends that I do now. You bring out the best in me. I'd spend a lot of that first summer watching comic dubs and finding new fan songs to enjoy. I'm sure it comes as no surprise that Gospel of Dismay was high on my list at that point. I don't think there's a single Bendy song Will Ryan has done that I don't love. I Am Me has been my alarm clock sound for more than a year now. I got really into Dry Guys comic dubs at the time too. There's this one by Misk Delusional called Act of Faith, and his performance as Sammy as he's losing his mind ripping out his hair, absolutely chilling. That lives in my head rent-free. I've been a comic dubber myself for years now in the Sonic scene. Haven't ever attempted a Bendy comic, but a lot of the ones I'd want to dub don't exist anymore. A standout in my mind from this time is the Vampire Inside Me's comics. She deleted her Tumblr years ago, but she was an artist I really admired back then. She had a lot of great stuff. The one where Henry is a perfect Bendy, one of the hundreds of Mafia AUs. Heck, I still listen to Dames Digits. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. His dubs of her Abel the Rebel Angel comics. Those hit me right in the soul. Another person I watched a lot of dubs from was my friend Jordan. You might have known them as Jordan the Cat 11 at the time, but I know them as Jordan Skarsfaven in the present. Jordan, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I don't think I've ever heard you say it. A lot of Jordan's old Bendy dubs no longer exist online, but their take on the Devil Darling's voice was a huge influence on how I interpret the character. They've since transitioned from a hobbyist fan actor to a professional voice actor, and in a funny twist of fate, I now do voice work for them and our friend Steve in their shared original webcomic, Tales of Annualia. It's been an honor getting to voice Venus. Some days I still can't believe that I get to work with the people I looked up to for so long. please consider checking this project out. It's so cool, and all of my castmates are absolutely amazing. You would be surprised how many of them have ended up in other parts of the indie mascot horror scene, like Paul Green Dennis as Ray in My Friendly Neighborhood, or Aaron Lundquist as Queen Bouncelia in Garden of Banban 4. I hope one day I can follow in their footsteps. It'd be so cool to get to voice on a project in a genre I love. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to 2017. There were a lot of AUs floating around at this point in the fandom. It's no secret that I love a good alternate universe. Taking a story and playing with it in a variety of contexts can lead to such interesting things. We only had 2 chapters worth of gameplay, but people were running with it to make all kinds of stories. I'd never really been exposed to fanworks that deviated from the canon like this before, so it was a real treat. Bendy had several popular AUs at the time, but today I'm going to focus on 3 particular creators whose work I got super invested in. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going into the deep intricacies of these stories, but I will link some parts of them below so you can explore. First up is Stargoing Supernova. Star is responsible for a number of stories I love, but today I'm focusing on her Inky Eyes Golden Heart AU. The original fanfic for this, Dreams Come True, focuses on Joey trying to summon a demon to bring his cartoons to life, instead of building the ink machine. And in a bizarre twist, he accidentally summons his best friend, Henry Ross, who was secretly a demon hiding amongst humans this entire time. Yeah, we didn't know Henry's last name was Stein back then, so Ross was a popular stand-in. Like Bob Ross. Very chill. Developing what the relationships were between the human employees in the 30s and 40s has always been something I love in this community, but having a dash of the occult in there is very much my preference. The friendship between Joey and Henry here is so much fun, and getting to look into Henry's demonic past was a treat. There are so many great character dynamics present here, and also, this was the start of my love for characterizing Henry as a dad. He is such a dad in these stories, and it's great! I read Star's work right as I was taking a fiction writing class, and when I was hitting a wall with my classwork, I started writing fanfiction as a palate cleanser. Star was the first person I ever gifted a fic to. It was a short story called Raindrops and References, where Henry makes a demonic deal with a studio intern that's secretly a mermaid. Funny story. I'd logged into AO3 right as I was getting ready for bed, and I was about to search for a fic to unwind with when I saw I had like 4 new comments. I'd never gotten a comment before, so that was surprising enough, but I nearly gagged on my toothbrush when I saw they were all from Star. She'd been geeking out about how much she loved it. I still come back to those comments when I'm having a bad day. It felt so good to know that I could bring someone joy the way they did for me. Next up is Shiny Zango. If you've been in the fandom since the beginning, you've probably seen Zango's work. She's responsible for the 2D AU. In it, Henry has a cartoon Bendy that lives on a piece of paper, and he guides him through the studio. When accidentally dropped in a puddle of ink, Bendy could escape from the paper in the form of a giant monster. And it was a fun time. This duo had a great dynamic, the storytelling was engaging, and frankly, I love Zango's art style. Now, Zango doesn't work on this AU anymore, but this is where I tell you about another one of those funny twists of fate. I'd end up meeting her in early 2018 because of her story, The Last Nutcracker, and I'd go on to become the voice for her character, Clara. While this is a video about Bendy, I feel it's only fair to mention that the Nutcracker community has been a really important part of my life in tandem with this series. If not for both of them, I would not be the artist I am today. Turns out there's a lot of us who love to play with stories based on E.T.A. Hoffman's The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. And several of those stories, my own included, would not exist without Zango. Incredibly grateful to her and everyone else I know in that space. You're all wonderful, and I couldn't be more fortunate to have met you. That being said, Zango's work inspired a number of other AUs in the Bendy space, and this one is especially near and dear to my heart. It doesn't really have a name. It's kind of an offshoot of the 2D AU that focused on other characters that weren't really present in it. Run by the marginal artist, this story featured a Henry that, like Bendy, had a monstrous form when touching too much ink, and in this particular instance, Sammy had him imprisoned. I don't know if this is something that happened in the 2D AU at any point, or if this was purely by Margin's making, but I loved it. Margin would end up making a Tumblr Ask blog called Sam the Bandman, where she would answer questions and roleplay as Sammy from this scenario, along with other characters down the line. And this would be the first time I interacted with an Ask blog. I mean, she was roleplaying as my favorite character. Her writing style was really appealing, and the blog did accept asks from just about anyone. So I very anxiously sent an ask in, And she responded. And looking back on it, it was a silly question, but it was a good way to dip my toes in. Little did I know we'd stick with this for a long time. Sammy had absolutely no qualms about sacrificing the Ask participants to the ink, and my character ended up as a searcher pretty early on. As time went on, I'd end up developing a proper character for this thing, as just playing myself would have been a little uncomfortable. This would end up being the first version of Bella U, who I'll talk about more in a bit. We'd later be joined by our friend Cyberflow and her character Cynthia, and the three of us had a great time. We'd go on to create a couple AUs together, and sometimes it strayed pretty far from the source material, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I remember so many nights where I stayed up until 3 a.m. my time just to get another block of text in for our stories, and it was absolutely terrible for my health. Do not consistently stay up until 3 a.m. on a school night, people. Learn from my mistakes. But man, these gals were my ride or die. I remember very distinctly when BATIM Chapter 5 came out. I was so nervous about what was going to happen, and Margin hopped on a call with me as we watched a playthrough of it together. She already knew what was going to happen, but she was still there to hold my hand as I hyperventilated. It meant a lot. We haven't been in touch all that much over the last several years, but they're both still people I remember fondly. I still value them as my friends, and they're still amazing storytellers. Sam Sam the Bandman wasn't the only place where I was cooking up stories, though. Inspired by our adventures, I decided to take a crack at writing my own fanfictions. And this is where we get to the original version of Searching the Depths, my primary Bendy fanfic. And because this is my video essay, I get to be extra self-indulgent today and talk about it. The original premise had a young printmaker, Bella Yu, falling into the studio after escaping someone that chased her on the streets of NYC, and she found herself trapped in Sammy's domain. Taking pity on each other, she agrees to help him find a way to set the denizens of the studio free. Now, the original version of this story is not being produced anymore, but it does still exist up on my AO3 page if you'd like to give it a read. However, I have been working on a revised version for several years now, Searching the Depths, the Heart of the Studio. At its heart, it's still about these two characters teaming up to break the cycle, but we're 15 chapters in, they haven't even met yet. I swear I'm getting there. The focus shifted to put more emphasis on the larger cast. This time, it's the 1960s, and we have Joey Drew accidentally knocking Bella off of a ladder while she's working as a movie theater custodian. And upon breaking her leg in a fall, Joey uses this vulnerability to take her in as an art apprentice, with this dastardly plot about ripping parts of his former employees' souls out and sticking them into other people to have an obedient new studio staff. Sometimes the vibe is writing about a wretched man who's trying to play God. On the flip side, the people of the cycle are starting to find that its hold on them is fading, and they're doing everything they can to break out and escape before Joey can lure the last former employee back to his old workshop. I'll let you take a guess who it is. No, it's not Henry. Henry's actually really cool. So he's actually a ghost that's been separated from his body. His body goes through the cycle as normal, but his ghost is writing golden messages on the walls to try and direct things off track. It's really fun to write. Admittedly, I went through a bit of a phase with it where I was really nervous about writing something with such a heavy focus on an OC, but I've got a number of OCs in this thing. Some important, some not, and I've since decided to stop being mean to myself about it. I'm writing this story for me, and if people vibe with it, great. If not, that's fine too. You gotta write for you. And now I finally have a chance to tell you what we're drawing. So, the art I've been working on this whole time? Yeah, it's a Searching the Depths piece. So, we haven't quite gotten there yet in story, but the idea is that eventually, Sammy Lawrence, Jack Fain, and Bella Yu become a trio. They're my sheep squad. They balance each other out really nicely. I mean, they all have to stop each other from being overly self-sacrificing regularly, but hey, that's part of the character growth. I've been wanting to draw them all cozy together for a long time, and finally we're doing it. I can think of no better gift in the cycle. Knowing that your found family is safe and with you, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of chocolate cake. Because you deserve it, Mr. Lawrence! Searching the Depths is very much my baby, but it's not the only AU I have. Most of them are more loose concepts I chat about with friends. Some are serious and deep, and others are very silly. Like the Cycle Breaker Zoo, that one where Wilson turns the Cycle Breakers into animals, so it's impossible for them to interfere with his plans. Yes, Sammy is a sheep in this. I have no shame. There's at least 3 different Nutcracker things I've considered. there's Boris in Nutcracker Nightmare, because it'd be cruel and unusual for the character whose whole thing is eating to be reduced to only cracking nuts. And also, like, years ago I did a poster for one of the fan art contests that had Alice as the Sugar Plum Fairy, and frankly, I don't want that concept to go to waste. There's one where Audrey is the Nutcracker, since she kind of feels like her inkiness is a curse in BATDR. And then there's the super indulgent coffee cake fic, where Sammy is the Nutcracker and Jack is the Clara. Because darn it, I'm not a hardcore shipper, but I like a lot of different Sammy ships. But coffee cake is my favorite. Like, they're musical partners, they're a set, do not separate. Oh, I've got Kraken's Labyrinth. That one is all merfolk. Like, Joey is the king of Atlantis, Henry flees Atlantis to live on the surface with his marine biologist wife, Linda, and years later, Joey finds him and traps him in a labyrinth with a giant kraken, which, you guessed it, is the ink demon. That one is so fun. I have a lot of feelings about making stuff. I'm sure this comes as no surprise, but I'm very much the person who, if you propose a cool idea in front of me, I will encourage you to go make it real. Like, you've got the power to create anything, and the journey to make it happen is so worth it. It never ceases to amaze me how creative our fandom is. It's frankly amazing what's happened in the last 7 years. Look at how much has changed. About me, about the fandom, about all of it. I mean, I'm still casually, and not so casually, enjoying AUs and geeking out with friends, and I've got so many more friends than I ever expected to have, and I love them all so, so much. I still do art, I still write fan fiction, but the places I've gone are places I never expected to go. Because I wasn't afraid to be myself and love what I love, Lauren Singer took notice. And it's a big part of why I'm here as one of your Bendy Fanbassadors. And it's been amazing. Getting to work on the Joey Drew All-Star Music Review was a blast. I now moderate for the love streams when the voice actors go live to sign prints and hang out with the fandom. Heck, I'm lucky to call a number of them my friends. They're great people. Actually, I've done a lot of moderating the past few years, haven't I? Used to do a lot for my friend the Cartoon Kitty when she played through BatDS and BatDR, and it was so much fun. Those were full of moments I'll never forget with all of our friends. Still can't believe Ben and Book Pass popped in at that one. That was awesome. I never would have guessed the thing about breaking the barrels if Ben hadn't said it. Got to be involved with Friendly from The Friendly Introvert and Brandon from Alvin Monk 500, the host of the Inky News interviews, for a number of streams, and also as a part of the artist showcase for a couple of said interviews. That was really fun. I've had some rather funny run-ins with the Meatly, too. This doesn't really fit cleanly into the script, but years ago, when they first got the Bendy plushies, I found Boris at my Walmart and tweeted about it. I don't have a screenshot of it, but he responded telling me to take good care of him, and younger me took that to heart. Boris has been my loyal travel buddy ever since. He also retweeted a Joey Drew I made in The Sims 4 after I made a post about him burning to death while trying to make eggs. That's probably my most liked tweet to this day, and it will never not be funny to me. My point is, even though I was afraid to be passionate before, it's paid off to just be myself. I'm a person worth liking and hanging out with, and nowadays, I'm surrounded by a wonderful community. Sure, you're not going to vibe with everyone in a fandom, but eventually, I think we all find our people. I hope that all of you find that someday, if you haven't already. So one last anecdote I was at a convention recently, and I got to meet some fellow Bendy fans and have a really nice chat with them. I didn't know these people particularly well, but it was such a good experience, and by the end of it all, I think I walked away with some new friends. One of them said something that really stuck with me. It was something to the effect of, imagine being normal about your interests. And you know what? She's right. We're not normal about our interests. In a convention space, so many people are decked out in merch and cosplays of their favorite characters. You have people running panels about incredibly niche topics so that they can share something they love. And we all existed together for a whole weekend, laughing and geeking out and taking pictures, because that's what a con is all about. It's about connecting with fellow nerds and reminding ourselves that we are not alone. And that's part of the joy of fandoms, too. There are so many ways to fandom. There are so many ways to enjoy something, and we all find different things fulfilling. And while I thought for years that there was no place for me within a space like that, I was wrong. There is a place for me. I am kind, I am passionate, and I'm a little particular. But I can be all of those things and get along with others. I can have some genuine friendships. There are a ton of people I haven't mentioned in this video that are important to me in the Bendy space, and I'm so nervous about hurting someone's feelings if I forget someone, so I'm not going to go into that list. But there are so many people I've met through this thing that mean the world to me, and I hope they know that they've made a really positive difference in my life. I have my demons and my doubts. I still have days where I feel like I don't belong. But I do belong, and I have proof of that. Just because we've lived in darkness for a long time doesn't mean we belong to it. There's always hope. Things do get better. Wow, what a note to end on, huh? It's hard to believe it's really been 7 years since I fell into the inky cycle, but boy am I glad I did. Thanks for coming over and listening to my story. It means a lot that you stuck here all the way through. I hope this video could bring you a little joy. Goodness knows we could all use more of that. Before I go, I've got one last thing to ask. What's a meaningful memory for you here in the Bendy fandom? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to celebrate with you. With all that being said, I think it's time to bid you adieu. Happy anniversary, Chapter 2. And happy birthday, Sammy Lawrence. You keep rocking on, you funky music man. Thank you all so much for watching. Here's wishing you a wonderful day. Cheers!